Impeachment motion of the Deputy President, Rigathi Gachagua, that is set to be tabled this afternoon. Of course, before we went for a break, a number of issues were mentioned. But before we continue with this conversation, yesterday the Deputy President had an interview and conversation with journalists, and he did defend himself on this issue of impeachment. I don't know if we can get that particular soundbite. Let's just listen in to what the Deputy President had to say in regards to this impeachment.
Rigathi Gachagua, Deputy President, atafukuzwa aende nyumbani na Wakenya hawa wajui makosa yake ni gani. Wakenya mimi nikiwasikiza kwa sababu mimi ni mtu ya kusikiza ground. Wanasema sisi tunataka kufanyiwa kazi. Tungetaka viongozi wetu wote washikane vile tuliwachagua, watufanyie kazi ambaye iko mbele yetu. Kwa hivyo mimi sina uwezo ya kushawishi wabunge wetu wasifanye vile wanataka. Wabunge wako huru kufanya vile wanataka. Lakini sana sana wabunge wamechaguliwa na wananchi. Ombi langu tu ni wafanye kitu inaitwa public participation. Waende pale Bomet, waulize wananchi. Sisi tunataka kwenda kufukuza Rigathi Gachagua kazi kama naibu wa rais. Maoni yenu ni gani? Vile wataambiwa na wananchi waende wafanye hivyo. Kwa sababu inataka na ikuwa namna hiyo. Kwa hivyo niseme hili jambo limezungumziwa sana. Mimi naona kwa magazeti. Yes. Naona kwa maredio. Mimi niko tayari. Najua mimi ni mwanaume. Mimi ni chuma ya zamani.
Maybe umesikia.
Na ile mambo yote tumepitia, yale tulipitia tukimsaidia Rais William Ruto akiwa na matatizo mengi, ilikuwa magumu sana.
All right, that is Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua yesterday. Dismas, you had a direct response to what the Deputy President was saying.
Yeah, he's raising an issue which has made a number of bills be rejected by the High Court.
Public
that
participation.
MPs must engage in public participation. But in my view, the moment you elect a member of the National Assembly, the voters, you give him or her agency to go and represent you at the National Assembly. So they do not need to go back. And in my view, I think what the Deputy President is doing is actually threatening the elected members of the National Assembly.
How so?
That, first of all, go and speak to your voters before you take a decision. And you remember he's doing a series of interviews. During the same interview yesterday, the journalist did post that, who exactly are you addressing? He said, I'm addressing MPs from Rift Valley. Then he said the prior day, he had addressed MPs from Mount Kenya. So essentially, he's giving them threats, which is unacceptable in my view. And also, there's a pertinent issue. Kevin says that I keep on giving examples from US and Nigeria, so he suspects I'm one of them. But the origin of the running mate principle is from the US. And if you have to call a spade, yeah. The purpose of having a running mate is that in the unlikely event that the position of the president or governor falls vacant, for whatever reason, you don't need to go for a by-election. So the framers of this position, or the guys who came up with the philosophy in the US, were avoiding having a by-election. Because having an election is very expensive. During that period, maybe whether it's 90 days, it can create a lot of political instability. That is why a strategic and visionary vice president, deputy president, or deputy governor, you're supposed to invest a lot of time in newspapers and having an expensive pen like this one of Kevin Osido and just filling the crosswords. You go to the office in the morning and you take tea and have mandazi and just wait. If the president or the governor gives you assignments to go read speeches on his behalf, you do it rubbing your hands with glee. You must not start threatening the principle. I think that is critically important. But unlike President Kenyatta, who did not give the deputy any responsibilities, now for the deputy president, understand his in-tray as full. And as Kevin may probably add a lot of value, that he's been given these responsibilities around devolution. He's in charge of the coffee reforms, tea reforms, and milk reforms. So instead of also doing these news conferences and complaining, he should be giving us a scorecard that from the time I was given the responsibility, these are the reforms I've done in the TISA, and the tea farmer in Mosocho is happy. These are the reforms I've implemented in the coffee sector, and farmers are happy. In the milk sector or in the livestock space. But what does he do? He comes to the public and he's offering threats. But a fundamental point there are, again, I suspect Kevin will tiptoe around, is there must, now the replacement for DP Gachagua, if is kicked out, must that replacement come from Mount Kenya? Because if you want to suffocate and kill tribalism, where can the replacement come from Lodwar or Wajir or Mosojo? Why do we have two names of Professor Kithure Kindiki and Anne Waiguru?
Precisely.
Yes.
And that really takes us to really the responsibilities of this person called a running mate and then a deputy president. And at the county level is a deputy governor. Mm-hmm. And I want to probably disagree with my good friend Bichachi that a running mate is chosen by the principal. I mean, by the president or the governor. Partly true, but largely wrong, especially in the context of the Republic of Kenya, where, for instance, in some parts of this country, it is the clan that chooses for you a running mate. And that becomes like a carrot and stick game.
The kingship.
Exactly. So for us to give you our votes, this must be. It's not that
we must see our son in the ticket.
Yes. Mm-hmm. It's not that now we are giving you names. You go. They tell you, for us, our people, to vote for you, this must be the running mate.
And politics is localized.
And indeed, politics is local. So the insinuation that a running mate is given to, or is chosen by, for example, that Mheshimiwa William Ruto chose Rigathi, goes back, Mheshimiwa Rigathi Gachagua, goes back to the people who are in that meeting. Whether actually among the casting of votes and lots that was happening, he preferred Mheshimiwa Rigathi Gachagua or someone else. Because if that is probably something that we can be able to also deal with, it will determine the tail end of this impeachment. Because if the president chose his deputy, then this impeachment will not see light of day. But if the deputy was chosen for him, then it means, therefore, that among the names that are there, and there may be any other names, he has a preferred heir, and so that heir will ultimately become the designate survivor.
But didn't President Ruto say that whatever happened to him in the previous administration won't happen to his deputy?
Not necessarily, because of politics. Remember that we already have those accusations that have been levied, but most of those things are not functionalities of office. They are issues, I mean, not incapacity. It is politics that is dribbling and meddling with issues that the deputy president is supposed to be underscoring. And remember that even as we speak, in addition to what Mheshimiwa Dismas,
no, it's okay. I love that title.
The deputy president for Kenya Kwanza, we don't even have a minister of devolution, because all those functions for the ministry have been domiciled at the office of the deputy president, with a PS that is supposed to be very actively engaging with counties. And we are hoping that some of these challenges that we are seeing with devolution are not as a result of what is happening with the office of the deputy president. But again, in finishing, Bichachi said that the politicians need to inspire people. And I wonder what mode of indicator are we using for this inspirational mobilization? And what is this good thing that we are seeing in our politicians that will actually motivate as many young people to want to run for office, to want to motivate as many good Kenyans from many other sectors like the private sector, people who are doing very well in their sectors, to want to run for office? Because the kind of examples that we actually have coming from one of the former cabinet secretaries is that, for example, our parliament is full of wash people who are dealing in drugs, people who are doing this and doing that. And the CS was never actually taken to task to be able to validate. And these are conversations.
Dr. Matiang'i.
Yes, I'm talking about Dr. Matiang'i. And even in saying so, in the previous governments, we have also heard of those kind of examples where people say the Minister of Interior.
This is the Hotspot Show. Radio.
See of day on some of these vices that therefore cripple and raise their heads in political spaces where the needs of the people and surrendered to them are supposed to be using that power to do good and also to inspire, as Bichachi says, and to motivate. But what we see is really misuse of power and conflicts, antagonism, things that do not inspire as many people, including Ashley, who would probably want to be a governor in some county, to want to get motivated and inspired to run for office. So I think as we talk about the impeachment process, roles and duties of the deputy president, it needs to rally through the entire electoral process so that we say, how do we agree on who the candidate is? How do we inspire? And once you have been elected, how do we even induct you? Because I know in some jurisdictions, I won't mention so that he doesn't accuse me of not being in Kenya.
Yes.
The president and his deputy are even taken for honeymoon. And you sit, you gel, you agree, so that when you emerge and speak, you are speaking
with one voice.
And that even if the deputy president has been invited to a county governance watch function to come and preside over some issues of devolution, that you feel comfortable. The office and deputy governor has already lodged a case against the governor in court.
So we lack cohesion.
Precisely.
Okay.
Those offices lack cohesion.
All right. I want Bichachi to respond to what you said, but even as you respond, Bichachi, this is not the first time we're hearing murmurs of an impeachment. There is an UDA parliamentary group meeting that was scheduled for this morning in State House. But what are the chances that the head of state doesn't have a hand in this? Bichachi, if you can unmute yourself. All right, we seem to be having a problem with getting Bichachi, but of course, Dismas, maybe you can respond to that question. You know, there's a UDA parliamentary group meeting that's scheduled for this morning, I believe at State House. What are the chances that the president has a hand in this? Because as Osido mentioned, he hasn't talked about it.
At that stage, I wanted to jump in, but you would have said that I've got bad manners. Because silence is part of strategic communication.
Yes.
Yeah, and is the head. In law, they say de facto and de jure of UDA. So probability that he has no idea or he has no information or the consequences of the impeachment motion is zero. Because my understanding is before you call any meeting, you have to agree on the agenda. The secretary and the chairman will agree on the agenda. The question maybe we should be asking is whether or not he supports the impeachment. Yeah, because you know, some members of parliament within UDA may say, we are unhappy with the current DP. And one of the grounds is that with little effort, the DP has managed to antagonize all elected leaders, you know, right from the MCA. It's on record that one of the senior-most members of the National Assembly indicated that the DP told all the elected leaders from Kenya to go look for him and kiss the king's ring. If you don't do that, then you'll have fundamental challenges in 2027. Maybe it's the MPs who have come up with the idea. And then now we'll ask ourselves, is there a democracy within UDA? So if the MPs come up with the idea, they tell the chairman, the president, we'd like to impeach your deputy. Will he say yes or no? So I guess after the meeting, now we'll have that clarity. But I also wanted to buttress a point that Kevin addressed about allocation of these political offices, especially in the counties. Because people will agree that in this election, the governor is coming from Clan A, the deputy from Clan B, the women rep from Clan C, the senator from this other clan.
Negotiating democracy.
Yeah, they keep on negotiating, which now raises a fundamental question. If political parties or the cartels in counties are the ones who sit in a dark room full of smoke and come up with a schedule that the governor must come from this clan or this constituency and the deputy, then what is the role of the normal voter? Are you merely endorsing a list which has been presented? And then number two, a fundamental question that you posed earlier on, and I noticed that Kevin tiptoed, is the moment you elect an MCA, is an MCA a representative or a leader? Is an MP a representative or a leader? Is a president a representative or a leader? Now, if you take the path that they are merely representatives, then why do we expect them to offer us leadership? You know, there are people who are very smooth, who can lodge a very successful campaign and win an electoral office, but they don't have leadership capacity. So we go back to Alima and Akinyi. When you're voting people for office, what do we consider? Do we just consider the razzmatazz and the SUVs, or do we look at an individual's capacity and competence to deliver? I think those are the fundamental questions. And there's even a philosopher who has said, don't complain about people who are in office because they're merely a reflection of the people you elected. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if you're talking about, Kevin, you said that there's a chance that you have members of the wash in the National Assembly. Were they nominated or they were elected?
Both.
Which is a bad thing.
Which is a bad thing.
We can talk about cartel.
Which, actually, again, let's go back to Siasa Kenya. Which is a good thing, which is a good thing and a bad thing, but largely a bad thing. Mm-hmm. Why? Because the nominations are done by political parties. And it is in this country that we have had people saying, go and ask so-and-so what I gave them or what I did to get the certificate. And it is also true that in certain parts of this country, the nomination certificate is actually the election. Mm. The moment you undertake the nomination and this man has his ticket, it is over. Whether somebody goes and gets into independence and has whatever they have and they bring it to the electorate, that election is over. Mm. But the challenge, therefore, is what is the space of the voter in this? And as an organization and many other partners, normally we undertake vetting of candidates. There are, town hall meetings where you invite the candidates, the citizens, they're called aspirants.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, before they are cleared by IEBC. So they sit there and you ask them questions. And largely, even the degree of response, you can already tell that the way somebody introduces him or herself, you can either make a good leader or not. But in most cases, some of these people still get elected, even by majority.
So the problem is Kenyans then, the electorate.
So the problem, in my view, is twofold. Mm-hmm. That one, the political party to be able to undertake its own due diligence. Because as Mark Bichachi was also mentioning earlier on, that in the case of the deputy president, he was nominated and elected with many court cases related to corruption. But it is our institutions that later came and said, oh, lack of enough evidence, there was nothing we found. But so what happens to institutions and absolving that individual against the precedents that we are setting for future voters? Mm. For instance, that I am corrupt, as an example, I get elected, I continue in office, but then in the forthcoming election, I still present myself against many others. Will I be elected or not? And some Kenyans will tell you, it is based on what you give us. And we have also seen this month, people go to EACC and Kenyans mobilize themselves and say, that thief that you have arrested is our thief. Can you release our thief or we'll bring down this house? Now, where is that the problem with our values, which are also inscribed in the Constitution in Article 10? Is it a problem with our culture? Is it a problem with our institutions? Or what is it? Because even on this issue of impeachment, those corruption allegations from the story that Chris did really present almost the backbone. Mm. But then, didn't we know about it? The gentleman was accused, he was acquitted. So what? Will the impeachment answer those issues? Will the impeachment set a proper precedence for future? Will the impeachment present a proper deputy president in the event that it is successful? And is the president's hand in it? Yes.
Actually, before I just want to bring in Bichachi, because I know he has been waiting. Bichachi, you were responding to what Osido said, but even as you respond, you are aware that, the previous time, the former president, that is Uhuru Kenyatta, did not go through with it. What are the chances that President Ruto will actually save the deputy president if that impeachment portion is tabled, considering what happened to him in the previous administration?
Let me remind all of us of a very big faux pas that Rigathi Gachagua did. One time the president had given a speech, I think it was during the Gen Z riots, and then the deputy president had the gall and the temerity to speak after the president had spoken, which of course we know is unacceptable in terms of presidential conduct. But what he did after that is he said that the president was misled and the head of intelligence, DG Nurdin Haji, was the one who was at fault. Now, I remind you of this to remind us of the character of one President William Ruto. President William Ruto is not a lax fellow. He's not a fellow who will let things happen without his consent or without his knowledge. And I can assure you, as sure as there is daylight today, that the president is fully aware and fully in control of this situation that is happening to Rigathi Gachagua. To insinuate that he is not is to, one, go against his very character, and B, to say that the UDA party and whoever these parliamentarians are acting without on the presidency without the express direction from the president. The question we should be asking ourselves is whether President William Ruto today in the parliamentary group shall have mercy on Rigathi Gachagua and not allow the MPs to table the impeachment or not. It is not a question of lack of awareness. It is a question of whether he wants to pull the proverbial trigger or not. Now, in terms of corruption and in terms of wash people, it is indeed very obvious that our political system is awash with people whose incomes and sources of money are not known. We have prison escapees who have become governors in these countries. We have people who have death certificates who become governors in this country. We've got people with magical degrees who become governors in this country. This country needs to go through a sanitization process. And for me, whether it is being done for one or for two or for three, I am 100% behind every time someone is being taken to task to explain where they've gotten their wealth, taken to task to explain where they've gotten money, and taken to task to explain what they have been able to do to get the resources that they are showing off about. This is a critical thing that must happen, and it is important that we remove the pin from the personality of Rigathi Gachagua and move the pin to what is the standard, the measure, and the fullness of the stature of a leader in this country. I am tired of TikTok celebrities. I'm tired of people who go to official meetings while licking lollipops. I am tired of people who lick each other on social media, lick each other's sensitive pictures. I am tired of people who are accused of killing their girlfriends. I am tired of people who are accused of spousal abuse. This country has politicians who have given us such a bad rap that, in fact, if you open the newspaper tomorrow and one of them has shot a gun somewhere, as indeed they did at a petrol station, it is not shocking. We have politicians who've been caught on CCTV shooting people. This is the problem with our country, that it is normal for politicians to have extremely bad behavior in this country. That is why I support this process of continually calling to question people who are suspected of ill behavior, infringing on the Constitution, and basic criminality.
Thank you, Bichachi, for that. No, Mark Bichachi is tired. But even as Dismas, you respond to that. Allow me to welcome George Kipi, who is an advocate. He just arrived. Good morning. Thank you so much for coming. Dismas, maybe you can respond before we go on to George.
Yes, there's an issue again raised by Kevin, so I'll keep on having him on the chopping board. Because he says before every election, they have a vetting process where they do tunnels and they try to establish whether or not people have got leadership capacity or potential. It will be interesting to find out the outcome, whether you just do it for purposes of visibility, or indeed the people who attend the tunnel meetings take notes, and that is reflected in the electoral outcome. And then the second thing, if you speak to a practical politician, he will tell you the purpose of an election is to secure power. So if you're going to secure power by having people with wash, fake academic qualifications, people who have committed all manner of atrocities, they'll tell you that a political party is not a moral barometer. They want to have a majority of seats in the National Assembly, in the County Assembly, in the Senate. So for them, what matters is the absolute numbers. If you want to discuss morals, then you can go to the Vatican City and you can look for EACC. For them, they're looking for absolute powers. They are looking for numbers. Because if you don't have numbers, you're not going to have a speaker of the National Assembly or Senate.
But integrity is key in leadership. Integrity
is key in leadership in theory. But when you are talking about a governor who wants to be sure that he's got a majority in the County Assembly, or a president who wants a majority in the National Assembly and the Senate, integrity is never high in the priority list.
Okay, right to reply before we move on.
Yeah, and I agree with Dismas, which really buttresses the point that I was making, and hence the reason we don't have the right people in our political leadership positions. Because the journey towards acquisition of that power is so dirty and ugly, and hence Bichachi says is tired, because we are actually getting the kind of people that we channel through. So it is garbage in and it is garbage out. Until that point, when we'll begin to provide mechanisms of getting the right people, and earlier on I was talking about people who are making it, for example, in the private sector or in academia or in various industries. And in certain jurisdictions, again, I will not mention where, sectors actually propel individuals that they identify. Trade unions, they get people that are making it in those unions, they support them, they mentor them, they take them through the political process and get them into those houses. Not necessarily through the kind of dirt that we engage in this country, at least we see that dirt. But that is the reason why we also engage in those town halls, so that people can be able to put these leaders to task. Tukikuchagua wewe, what will you do? You have been living with us here. This road is so bad. As per Schedule 4 issues, it is your responsibility. What will you do? And the people, because they're the ones who will wake up to go and vote, they either agree with you or disagree with you. And it's also an opportunity for them to ask very detailed questions about integrity. And that is the reason why as civil society organizations, ahead of the 2022 general elections, we had 23 people who were actually put on a blacklist. And EACC was told, investigate these people. IEBC was told, don't clear so-and-so to run for office.
Did IEBC clear them?
As we speak, about 13 governors are actually on the radar of EACC being investigated over corruption. So the process is okay. The process presents a platform for citizens to engage with their leaders, and is a process where they also get to get the numbers of these leaders. Ukichaguliwa and you change your number, we get to know, and one day tunaweza kukusalimia.
But EACC has been accused of being a toothless dog. But before we even get to that, allow me to just bring in George Kithi. Now, he is the legal mind. Osido has been holding fort here. He even has his own.
You must say he's done a very good job.
But just bringing you in, last month we celebrated 14 years of the 2010 Constitution. Yep. Did the drafters of that particular constitution ever envisage that there will come a time where administration after administration, there is a skewed relationship between the two top leaders?
Yes. Let me put it this way, that society is a constant keg of friction. And it is invited because nature beholds that people are in competition constantly. The space you occupy today, somebody else ought to occupy that space, but you did it. Through whatever means, through your academic paper, through your connection, through whatever advantages you had that the other person don't have an advantage. And some get those positions on account of contextual circumstances, that if another time an opportunity like that will have arise, they would have gotten it. And therefore you realize that entry and exit into circumstances is very contextual in all spheres of work. Now, human beings, being what we are, we have our tin pots of existence that go about expanding all the time. The extensity is basically infinite. I'm important in this globe. because they're human rights. But I'm important in Kenya because I'm a Kenyan citizen, but I come from a certain place because I have a tribe, but I also have a family. And therefore, I'm biased towards my connections over time. You can't take away that, and it is my right to be biased. Now, when we were drafting the constitution that serves us now, we were reactive. And the policy in law we used, or the principle in law we used, is the mischief rule for purpose of enactment of a constitution, because we were looking at the history and trying to cure how we suffered or what we thought we had suffered. We may even have had a good constitution, but because it was mutilated and misused, we thought it was a bad constitution. I will tell you this. No amount of legislation brings good behavior. It is the good people that bring good behavior. So we can have the best constitution and best laws, and by then we still suffer bad behavior or immoral behavior. There are countries that don't have any constitutions in this world, but they are better in terms of governance than us, with structures and everything, without being foretold in a document, because the principles that they've laid out in terms of administration and all that. Our customary environments that we lived before Kenya became Kenya. The Kikuyus had their own, the Kambas their own, the Mijikendas had their own, the Turkanas had their own. Those ones were probably working more in terms of favor for the people in the context of their own fiefdom and imports, as opposed to what we have now, because the competition is higher, because we've been put together, all of us, as a group of tribes, to live together in a society called Kenya. So when we were enacting we were debating, and therefore towards enactment of the institution of presidency, we had seen what Moi had done and how he had abused at that time, or used for political reasons that position. Sometimes we have a deputy vice president, then sometimes we take for a whole year without. So we reacted and say the institution of presidency is fused into one. You must say who your deputy is and you run with your deputy. The problem is you come back, when you fall into the fold of leadership, then there's competition and friction. Because one aspires to be president, one aspires for dominance, the other one also wants more dominance over the other. And because of that political competition, that friction, invariably, you need a very docile vice president for there to be peace in that house. Otherwise, there'll always be friction because the aspiration of the identity of the vice president. And I think that's what Gachagua was trying to do, trying to get an identity of sorts. And you remember he came in very funny circumstances. He was not the ideal vice president. An ideal vice president will come with numbers, but I don't think he came with numbers or a command of his backyard.
He will disagree with you.
Wait, let me tell you. Let me tell you this, because we were there. So
yes. Yes.
When you see, so whatever he donated,
Yes.
people would think he donated votes, but it was not the votes. The Mlima in its own unison bargained for whatever they bargained at that time as a group. Okay? But now, because he has to bargain, he has to go back. When he goes back now to negotiate, to put them together, he had to have a dominant voice of a clarion call from Mlima. That way, one is he struggles to put them together, but he disenfranchises the other side of Kenyans. That's the problems that he has today.
Okay.
So the problem he has today is, one, he's making, but two, he had no other way other than to capture Mlima for purpose of political bargain. I don't know whether he has managed or not for now, but there was no other way of doing it as a politician, because the work of a politician is to get a clientele base as a resource and a tool of trade for purpose of political mobilization and a negotiation on the table. Okay. So what we envisaged then was probably an ideal that the president and the deputy president roles would be complementary. Okay. I'm a deputy, principal deputy to the president, and whatever he says, I have what we call, I'll work under the principle of collective responsibility. So that whatever the president says, I will support it. Okay. But when the president says or does certain things that I don't agree with, for instance, that politically undermine me or my existential threat is probably heightened at that time, then I will behave in a certain manner as a departure to that principle of collective responsibility. But in law, if you go as a deputy president, you're under the principle of collective responsibility under the Constitution, and furtherance to that, whatever the president says, you have done. Okay. Whatever the president does or says, you have done. Even if a Danny comes, you have also brought a Danny. That's what it means. Okay. But then if you want to walk away from that, you do it because you want a different face other than the face that the president poses for the people of Kenya. And therefore your representation is probably, yes, you are in it, but you want to be out of it for purpose of certain advantage that you want to acquire at that time.
And Ashley, it's good that Wakili came and actually clarified that there is something that was given. Remember the discussion about how did he become
the deputy president? Yes,
the designated survivor, right? And that is the reason that is actually what responds to the question of the president's hand in this. If the president is convinced that whatever you used to bargain, we've either delivered, or we have responded to it,
or it's extinguished,
or is done, the deputy president will be impeached.
Okay.
But if he is not convinced that we have actually given you a green light and we have responded to the bargaining power, the gentleman will stay.
You know, Bichachi, coming to you, you did mention that you were tired and a number of things. But let's talk about the mtu wetu mentality. If we need change, we need to start from there, don't we? Bichachi, can you hear me? Once again, we're having a challenge with getting Bichachi. But of course, coming back, Dismas, we've talked about the issue of their possible replacements that have been identified. But then, if someone else comes after what has happened, will they really have a voice, you know? Or it's more of, do this, yes? You are a yes man.
As the lawyer was taking his rightful position after Kevin has enjoyed 1.5 hours, as indicated, when you are the deputy, in fact, in my view, what a good vice president or deputy president needs to do is just take this constitution and read Article 147.
Yes.
And maybe sit with a leadership coach or a mentor and understand the role of the deputy president. And then also get time to go through the Bible, get time to go through the 48 rules of power, to know that you are a principal assistant. And I told you how it's referred to in my mother tongue. Kanda ya moko or joluedo. When mtu wa mkono, you wait for instructions. If you are uncomfortable in that role and you think you are a co-president, then you are not going to survive.
But you're inheriting a poisoned chalice.
You will be given a very clean chalice. And if it's going to get any poison, it's because of your acts of omission or commission. You must understand your responsibility and play to it. And then at some stage, Bichachi indicated that he is sick and tired of the quality of leaders that we have. And you know it's not limited to Kenya. And at the risk of annoying Kevin, if you go to the most powerful city in the world called New York, the mayor called Eric Adams is in trouble. He's been accused of receiving bribes or gifts from members of the Turkish administration to give them a soft landing. I understand actually there was a building owned by the Turkish which was supposed to be opened, and it had issues with their fire licensing and safety. But he leaned on the local guys for them to get a license. So when they wanted to have a conversation with him and look at his mobile phones, I saw in those papers, I don't know what they're called, the ones which are presented in court, he said that he gave them his 2 official mobile phones, and then he also gave them his personal one, but he said, I've forgotten the password for my personal phone. Well, that mayor is African, so I don't know whether it's, or rather he appears to be black, so I don't know whether now it's limited to people of African origin. But just to say that we have this mischief all over the world. Even in France, there was a president who was in trouble. In South Korea, a president was put behind bars. So actually, I think it's about leadership and integrity. And then you've asked a very fundamental question, that what should we expect of the replacements? In my view, the next replacement must inspire confidence, both at a local level, Kenya, and at an international level. Because now, this impeachment process gives the president a blank check, a clean piece of paper to determine who is going to be his assistant without the encumbrances of the meeting that Wakili has clarified, that there was something given. At that stage, maybe the president was under duress. He was having many balls in the air, but right now he's got that blank check. And then you must also look at whether the new candidates will add any value. Because, as I see it, if he gets a replacement from Mount Kenya, the replacement will spend the next 3 years fighting off a tag called traitor. Because that will be the next level of propaganda. That nilitolewa, ujamaa kapatiwa kiti, now this is a traitor. Maybe this again gives the president the opportunity to start making Kenyans feel like, to use again the DP's words, that all of us are shareholders in Kenya. So you get somebody maybe from Western Kenya, from Kisii, but you get a solid candidate, because the deputy president is a heartbeat away from the presidency. And you cannot afford to have somebody who is a deputy that you've placed in that position because of duress. And I wish that Wakili, because he understands law, he can actually give us the dynamics so that we can even contextualize this conversation, that how did Rigathi come to this position? Is he part of a team that we also need to impeach after Rigathi, that they gave us, they knew they're giving us bad goods, but went ahead to give us bad goods? I think there's a lot of contracts to that effect.
let me explain this. Okay. Let me explain this and how serious this impeachment means to Kenyans, because it's a very serious issue. Kenyans must understand that the Constitution envisages any president can be replaced. Any president. And the context in which a president ceases to hold office, one of these is death. Now, I'm not saying any president is going to die, but it's envisaged in our Constitution, and we've put it in print. Today, therefore, if the president is not there, even for death, as a cause, it means Gachagua takes over. So when you have a deputy president who tells you that, and persistently, consistently, insistently, continuously talks about Mlima, all right, and says, I'm not apologizing for the emphasis on Mlima. And the following day, something happens to the president, and she assumes president. He becomes a president of who?
Mlima.
Of who? Of me? Over Turkana? Over Samburu? No. He becomes a president of Kenya, yet he has an emphasis by conduct, consistent conduct, as a dominant figure representing a certain place. So it is wrong for him, for us to have a president who potentially is a step away from presidency, who then represents himself as a leader of a certain place. When you come to leadership, you certainly will have biases, the ones I've explained. You come from a certain place, you've gone to a certain school, you have a professional background, you're a lawyer or an architect. So you have a cluster of people you've worked with throughout who have gained your trust and friendship in the process. But it doesn't mean that those biases have to be dominant when you come into leadership. And this is how we tested it. In the BBI case, I think in good faith, mostly suspiciously in good faith, President Uhuru Kenyatta then wanted certain changes to be able to change the executive, reorient it so that it gets the aspiration of Kenyans because of the ethnic balance that was needed then. And probably it was important, and still probably we haven't exhausted the debate on that. But then when he did that, we went to court as lawyers and said, hang on, it doesn't matter whether what you're doing is good, but the process is equally important. When we elevate you as a president, you stop being a normal Kenyan. Therefore, it can't be a citizen's process, it can't be a popular initiative if you are the president and you want to initiate it because of this conflict. You now are in presidency, you are ruling us, then you want to tell us how the reforms should be implemented in order for us to continue to rule us. No. By the time you're in the space of ruling us, you already are biased. You have a dominant position over us. So you can't then introduce laws on how you're going to rule us because we are the ones to say how you're going to rule us. Yeah. And that was the conflict that was there. Suffice it to say that, fast forward, you elevated into a certain position, and we are saying you hold that position in trust for Kenyans, and therefore you must behave in a certain way, notwithstanding your background. So a judge, therefore, sitting and judging a case, but he lost his brother from a road accident caused by a matatu driver, cannot say matatu drivers are bad, and therefore I will jail you. He can say that because there's a context to it. The matatu driver may be innocent in this context, but the one that killed the judge's brother may be wrong. And therefore, you don't elevate yourself, you don't bias yourself in official fiefdom, that space. You show the statesmanship. Where is the statesmanship that Gachagua has shown us? And the questions arising, therefore, are because the Constitution is not complementary of the behavior and conduct that he has shown. And you see, it is not once, it is not twice. It is something that has been dominant as a personality. In leadership, you have what we call a behavioral dominant position that you give. For instance, we know William Ruto talks like this, then maybe he'll implement, maybe he won't, I won't go into that. But we have a position for him. Then Raila Odinga is good at this and this. We know, when he stands up, we know what he's going to say. And we have the deputy president, we expect him to talk about Mlima. And even now, tomorrow, when he stands up, I expect him to say about Mlima, not about the children who are hungry in Turkana, not about the school fees problem with higher education. No, I don't expect him to say that. Honestly, I expect him to continue talking about Mlima. It's a dominant figure that he has given us, and we are consuming what he's giving us.
Okay.
Right? So rightly speaking, therefore, the space of the Constitution, what the Constitution has said the office is beholden to in terms of how you behave, Article 10, and the things that you should aspire for Kenyans. You're supposed to be the figure that can take over the mantle of presidency. If then you show us that you're an MCA, or you don't even deserve to be an MCA, because an MCA should speak about his people in that context, or a member of parliament. Okay. So if then you go cheap, then you have a conflict and friction with the Constitution. Suffice it to say, therefore, the problems that Gachagua has is a test of the provision of the Constitution that we have entrusted in leadership. Is it time that we instill fear in the hearts of leaders to fear the Kenyans and to fear the Constitution? Is it time?
Okay. Even as you respond, could you say that President Ruto has single-handedly dismantled the Mount Kenya region? I mean, Deputy President said, Musiguse Mlima. And clearly, Mlima unaenda kuguswa. You know?
That's a very hard one. But give it to him. The president is that stoic politician. The gentleman is very calculative. He's a go-getter. And the president is also a giver. In the case of our country, and especially given the context that we have painted and we are dealing with, you have to give something to get something. Interestingly, as other people say, you have to rub my back, and I rub your back. If the president is able single-handedly to deliver what the Mlima people wanted against what Wakili says that the DP surrendered, then we give it to him. The president has managed. But take it back many years back towards the formation of UDA and Kenya Kwanza, there was no single other party other than UDA that had the majority. And even the other smaller parties in Mount Kenya were actually gobbled into joining UDA and or formation of Kenya Kwanza. And those are efforts that I am sure or probably believe that were managed, driven, and implemented by the president. Especially coming from a background of being in that government, of the late President Moi, may God rest his soul in peace, learning from how things were being done from a statecraft perspective. He moved into being a little bit in the opposition post-2002. And then when they were running for president with Mheshimiwa Uhuru Kenyatta, he made him his chief campaigner. Now that gave, in my view, President William Ruto an opportunity to know who to call when you need a rally where, and who to call when you need a small group of people to strategize over something. And over time, we see the president actually implementing some of those lessons, that is able to even go to Mount Kenya and guza that Mlima without necessarily the captain of the Mlima. Now, if those are some of the things that Mheshimiwa Rigathi Gachagua surrendered, then he is actually going. But if the president's hands are still tied to a level where he has to consult his deputy, who apparently portrays himself as the chieftain of the mountain, then that could probably give him a few escape areas. But the president, being that stoic politician as we know him and as I've probably narrated very briefly, I don't think in any part of this country he would probably need somebody, to inform and say, I'm coming to your area, help me get a few men to organize. Look at what he has done with ODM, for example.
Yeah.
That, okay, if Nyanza, particularly Luo Nyanza, wants to be a problem, I know how to get it. And look at the Gen Z demonstrations. The only thing that people are still, quote unquote, cussing is the handshake between Mheshimiwa William Ruto and Mheshimiwa Raila Amolo Odinga. And they are saying, had it not been for that handshake, see how people received the president in Luo Nyanza, where probably it was believed that this is done. We are never with you. We will not do anything with you. But he goes and he gets, sitting MPs. And they resign from being MPs and they join cabinet. And the gentleman goes and says, oh, I've given you what you wanted. So there is nothing, therefore, in my view, that prevents the president from changing that coat, the presidential coat, and putting on the political coat and going to the coast area and says, this is what I want to do. Will you guys accept it? And then mobilizing the people that he thinks are able to actually speak, and that when they speak that narrative, then the common people, the citizens, also resonate with that. And I think if those are some of the considerations towards the impeachment process, then I don't think Mheshimiwa Rigathi is actually staying, because the president has proved that I can be able to go there and get what I want despite your own moratoria and what you think should not be touched or should be touched.
Okay, this was coming to you. Do you think perhaps maybe it was a mistake for the Mount Kenya region to go into this government? I mean, you remember the formation of Kenya Kwanza. It was different parties from various regions combined into one. Perhaps was it a mistake for the Mount Kenya region to go in it without a party of its own?
It was, in my view, the only mistake is for Rigathi Gachagua to believe that he's a co-president. Because you can form as many political parties as you wish, but the question is, do you have sufficient political capital for you to move the needle? So you had a political party by the name UDA, and UDA was running on President Ruto's, then Deputy President Ruto's political capital. In my view, President Ruto would have won the Mount Kenya vote with any other politician from the so-called mountain. He would have picked a politician from Nyeri. He would have picked somebody. Because the only thing a Mount Kenya face was going to give is give people emotional confidence that what you said earlier on, mutu wetu wako huko. Yeah, because he had done groundwork. And give credit to President Ruto, he went to every village in Kenya campaigning. In my home in Mosocho, he stopped by the local market on 3 occasions. So he had a very proactive grassroots support. You would even recall that his last campaign rally was actually in Mount Kenya, while Mr. Raila Odinga went to Kasarani to do his final rally. But on the last day, I think he did about 4 meetings. And the last one, which was a prayer session, a few minutes to 6 o'clock, in fact, he shed tears in Mount Kenya. So he would have done that. Now, when you talk about KK, Musalia Mudavadi had his political party, Wetangula had his political party. That is why they signed some arrangements, because they were coming in with their own political parties. Now, if the DP Rigathi Gachagua now believes he's gotten the mountain under key and lock, then he should do what Mr. Raila Odinga did when he quit a political party and set up his own political party. There was a rumor around that the DP, in fact, has bought a political party. So let him actually resign and then go mobilize this mountain on his own motion using his own political capital. Then at that stage, you will know that he can move the needle. But as Wakila indicated, there was that BBI. Then after that, there was NADCO. Then there's a very clever politician, again from the US, now I'm not going to mention his name, who says that you never let a crisis go to waste.
Okay.
In my view, this impeachment is, depending on how you look at it, is some sort of a crisis. in maybe the president shouldn't let it rest. Because, NADCO has come up with very solid proposals. Now maybe it's time to implement these NADCO proposals. Because at the top, then this Mutuwetu philosophy can be accommodated. For some strange reason, these two gentlemen you see here, they are the cream in society. Right now, the conversations they're having are structured around national and public interest. But believe you me, a few days to the elections in 2027, they'll start thinking about their villages. That is when they remember, oh, wait a minute, I'm a Mijikenda, I'm a Luo, I'm a Kisi, I'm a Luya. Now, if you want to guarantee political stability in Kenya, then this Mutuwetu philosophy has to be anchored in our constitution. So that when I look at the cabinet, I see somebody from my village, then it gives me some comfort. But not talking about that. Does the current cabinet, as constituted, reflect the face of Mount Kenya? If you look at the number of cabinet secretaries, how many, for instance, come from Kisii? How many come from Mount Kenya? How many come from Elwak, Mandera? How many come from, there's a place called Bajun. The composition of the principal secretaries, does it reflect the face of Kenya? The composition of the parastatal heads, does it reflect the face of Kenya? And does it mean that you can actually be punished for offering a divergent political position? Because as Rigathi Gachagua indicated, if you're not a shareholder in this process, do not expect dividends for 5 years. So was he giving a threat that when you go to an election, look at your crystal ball, even if it's broken, identify who is likely to be the winner and align with that winner? Because if you don't do so, then you're going to be in trouble for the next 5 years. In other words, Kevin, I'm sorry. There's a gentleman called Martin Luther King who indicated that people must be judged by the content of their character.
Yeah. Yes.
No, it's because you people here understand Kenyans, you don't like reading and you don't like writing.
No.
Yeah, that people must be judged by the content of their character.
That's correct.
But can you say Kenyans are judged by their character or they are judged by their surnames when you apply for a job in the public sector? Because some people are saying that if your name begins with an O,
That's true.
probability of getting considered is there's a challenge. So with this kind of a crisis, let people be judged by the content of their character, then we mainstream capacity, competence, and meritocracy. So that in future, even if the entire cabinet is made up of people from one community, we are not worried, provided the cost of living has been reduced, provided inflation is low, provided interest rates are very low. But right now, what happens during the cabinet composition, when there's going to be a news conference from State House at 3 o'clock, what people want to see is whether any name approximates their village. Even as some state people stop using their surnames. So people have got Western names. Somebody calling himself Steve Jobs because he doesn't want the surname to compromise his capacity for public office.
Yeah.
So I think this crisis gives the president a good opportunity to reset the baton.
All right, I know we want to rebuttal on that, but before we do that, let's just take a break. And when we come back, we'll be telling you what exactly the Deputy President, Rigathi Gachagua, did say yesterday on his Mount Kenya people shortly.